Today on our 2016 Kia Sorento, we're going to be taking a look at and installing the Universal Installation Kit for trailer brake controllers, part number ETB-C7. So here's what our ETB-C7 looks like fully installed. It's going to give you a bracket to mount our 7-way, and it's also going to have a 4-pole flat on the end of our connector as well. Now this is going to allow us to wire up most brake controllers. In our application, we installed a Hopkins INSIGHT Flex Mount, but it's going to work with most traditional style brake controllers as well. In order to install this, you're going to need to already have a 4-pole flat installed on your vehicle. Comes with all the necessary hardware to get it in place. Now let's show you how we get it installed. We're going to start by mounting our 7-way bracket. Fortunately, we have a spot right here on our hitch, so we're going to take our bracket and the supplied hardware. We're going to line up the holes, and I'm going to drop down a screw on top, one on each side. And then I'm going to follow it up with a flat washer, then followed by a star washer, and then finally a nut. I'm going to take a Phillips head bit right here just because of the limited access. And I'm going to be using a 5/16 socket on the bottom of the nut to tighten everything up. We're ready to put our 7-way onto our mount here. So I'm going to slide the wires through. I'm going to put it in place like that. And I can grab my hardware, line up my holes, and start bolting everything down. We provide you with a machine screw and a locking nut. We're going to come from the front, putting our screw through and putting our nut on the back side. Now we're going to repeat that process for the other 3 remaining holes and tighten everything up. If we come back to our 7-way, we're going to have a 4-pole coming off the back, and we're going to find our factory 4-pole. Now before we connect, I'm going to put a little bit of dielectric grease in there to help save it for any kind of corrosion or any other kind of moisture getting in the connector. Now you can pick this up on our website using part number 11755. We're just going to plug in our factory connector into the back of our 7-way here. Then I'm going to get a zip tie and zip tie it together so that way it's a semi-permanent connection. If we take our white wire with a ring terminal, we're going to need to ground this to the vehicle. So we need to find a suitable location. And I'm going to put my ground right here. I'm going to be using a self-tapping screw to put it into place. So we're going to have a blue, a black, and a purple wire left at the back of our 7-way. Now our purple wire is for our reverse signal light. Now we're not going to be using it in our application, so I'm going to take a little bit of dielectric grease. I'm going to put it in the connector. And then I'm just going to tape up the ends so I don't have to worry about any moisture or any corrosion coming back up and feeding back into my 7-way. We already have some connectors on our wires here, and we do have butt connectors that are included in our ETB-C7 kit. Now I'm going to be replacing all of these connectors and the ones with our kit with some heat shrink connectors just so I can get a little bit better protection against moisture and corrosion. So anytime you see one of these connectors, you can pick some up on our website using part number DW05745-10. Since I'm replacing these connectors, I'm going to cut the ends off. I'm going to strip the ends of the wires, and then I'll attach my heat shrink butt connector. We're going to need to find our gray duplex wire here. We're going to need to cut a small slit to separate our black and white wire inside our sheathing here. Now I do want to mention you want to be extra careful not to pierce the wires inside. So you can either take a pair of cutters, a pair of scissors, a utility knife, or whatever you have. Just be careful not to cut the wires on the inside. Just make a small incision and you should be able to peel enough of it apart to separate the wires. We're going to strip both ends off of our black and white wire and our duplex wire. We're going to take the black wire and we're going to connect it to our other black wire using the butt connector we just put on. And our white wire is going to connect to our blue wire. Now you can use any heat source to shrink up these heat shrink butt connectors. I'm going to be using a heat gun. Now I do want to mention that if you are using an open flame such as a lighter, you want to be extra careful not to char your wires or the connector itself. We're going to need to run our duplex wire all the way up to the front to our battery. To help us bring our wire from underneath our vehicle up to our battery, I have a piece of airline tube that I had laying around. You use just about anything, a coat hanger, basically anything that's going to keep its structure. I'm going to feed this down so it comes out to where my wire is ending up, then I'll be able to come up and pull it up through. Just want to keep in mind when you're routing your wire and whatever you're using to pull up your wire, you want to be careful not to get too close to any moving parts or any hot sources like the exhaust. I'm just going to take my end, hook it around something so it doesn't fall through. So all my loose wires back here on the back of my 7-way, I just tied up behind the hitch here. And then my duplex wire, I ran along the hitch, going around the spare tire. I went over our frame, over the rear axle, came down right by our fuel tank, put a zip tie here on our emergency cable, then ran my cable underneath this cover till it ended up right here, right behind my transmission, right where my red airline tube is coming out. I'm going to tape the end of my duplex wire to my airline tube so that when I start pulling on it, it's not going to separate and I won't drop the wire. Now we can go back up top and pull our cable through. We're going to need to install a 40 amp breaker that is with our kit. Now this is going to go in between the power wire, the black wire that we ran from the back. That's going to attach to our silver post here. And then we're going to attach another wire from the copper post going to our positive terminal or battery. Now I think right here would be a suitable location because there's nothing behind it and we won't have to worry about it interfering with anything. So I'm going to take a couple of the included self-tapping screws. I'm going to mount it right here. We need to strip back the coating all the way to at least right where our breaker meets. So we're going to take our black wire and we're going to connect it to our breaker. So we're going to have plenty of extra wire here. I cut our wire here, making sure I have enough room to reach my breaker. And I'm going to strip the end of it back. Now I'm going to take one of our provided ring terminals and I'm going to put it on the end of our wire and crimp it down. Now I'm going to loosely attach it to the silver post on our 40 amp breaker. The extra black wire that we cut off, I'm going to hold on to this because we will be reusing this later. So we're going to take our smart box here and we're going to need to determine where we want to mount it. Now Hopkins recommends that you mount it on the center console or the kick panel of your vehicle, and you don't want to mount it on your dash. So with the way our vehicle's set up, I'm going to come right back here just past our gas pedal and here in our center console, and I'm going to mount it right here tucked up out of the way. Now I'm going to be using the self-tapping screws that they provided in the kit. I'm going to be using a 1/4 inch nut driver to put them in place. Now our brake controller is also going to have a flex display. We're going to be able to mount this display wherever we want without having to mount it to the smart box. So to keep things clean and out of the way, I think I'm going to put it right here in the corner of my dash. That way also, when I get ready to, I can run my wires behind the dash and hide everything. Now they also provided us with some twin stick double-sided foam tape, and that's how we're going to be mounting our display to our dash. We're going to take the backing off of one side and we're going to apply it to the bottom of our display. I'm going to take the backing off the other side, push the display down in the position that we want it. It also comes with a flex controller, so we're going to be able to mount this where we'd like as well. And I think right here would be a good spot. It's going to be out of the way and it's not going to interfere with any of our pedals or any of our keys coming out of our ignition. And we'll still be able to run our wire down to our smart box and be able to hide everything. And they have provided us again with some more twin stick double-sided tape. And we're going to do the same thing with how we mounted our display. To run my wire from my display, I'm going to pull my weather stripping down and route my wire into my panel here. So if we just come to our weather stripping and pull away, it should come loose. Found the best way actually is just to run the wire right here along this panel. I'm going to come down, I'm going to have it tucked in behind my weather stripping. I'm going to come down right here and then I can run my wire back and over to my smart box. I'm going to go ahead and put my weather stripping back now that I have my wire tucked in. Now I just need to get the end of my wire over to the back side of my smart box. You just want to make sure you're keeping clear of your pedals, that way the wire doesn't obstruct you while you're driving. I'm going to go underneath my dash here, coming over to my smart box, and I'm going to leave my wire right here for now. Our flex control wire, we have a couple different options of how we're going to route it. We can either go behind our bezel right here in between our two panels, or we can come underneath our steering wheel and feed it through. We can route it right over here like that. Either way, we're going to have just a little bit of wire going to one of the edges. And then I'm going to route the end of my wire to the back of my smart box. Now, if you take a close look at our smart box, the larger port for our display is going to be closer to the harness coming out of the back. And then the smaller one for our flex control is going to be on the bottom of our box. So I'm going to go ahead and plug these in. I'm going to take a couple zip ties and tie up the excess wire underneath my dash. That way I don't have to worry about them getting in the way while I'm driving. We're going to need to run that white wire from our engine bay into our cabin. And we have a perfectly good grommet right here to gain access into our engine bay. So again, I'm going to take that piece of airline tubing that I was using before, and I'm going to push the grommet out of the way, and I'm going to push it into the engine. Now our airline tube is going to come out right next to our brake reservoir all the way against the firewall. We're going to take our airline tube and we're going to attach the white wire to the end of it and pull it back into the cabin. Now, since we have so much excess white wire that we had running in from our engine bay, I'm going to cut this back and we're actually going to reuse this white wire as well. Now on the back of our brake controller here, we're going to have a harness. And this is the other end of our harness here. Now we're going to take the white wire that we just ran from the engine bay and we're going to connect it to our blue wire. So we're going to strip back the ends and put our heat shrink butt connector on. We're going to get ready to mount our 20 amp breaker and then we're going to mount it right next to our other breaker. Now we're using the 20 amp from our kit because our vehicle is somewhat of a smaller SUV and it's not going to be pulling a trailer that's going to have more than 2 braking systems on it. So we're going to go ahead and take 2 of the self-tapping screws and we're going to mount it right next to our other 40 amp breaker. We're going to take our leftover black wire and we're going to strip it back and we're going to attach it to the silver post just like we did with our other breaker. Our leftover white wire we're going to be using as a ground wire. So we're going to strip back the end. We're going to attach one of the large ring terminals to the end of this. Now using a 10mm socket, I'm going to remove this post on our negative side of our battery. We're going to attach the ring terminal onto our negative battery. We're going to take our airline tube and go back through the grommet that we went with our white wire so we can grab our power wire and the ground wire that we just hooked up. Now we're going to do the same thing we did earlier. We're going to tape our wires to our airline tube and we're going to pull it through to the inside of our cabin. Again, we have a whole bunch of extra wire, so we're going to go ahead and cut them right about the same spot that we cut our other wire that we connected to our brake controller harness. Now I'm going to strip back both ends of our black wires, the one coming from our engine bay here and the one coming off our brake controller harness. Now we're going to repeat the same process for our 2 white wires. Then I'll be connecting them with the heat shrink butt connector. Now we're going to need to come to our brake switch here. And we're going to have to test each wire. And what we're looking for is a power signal only when the brakes are applied. And I went and unplugged it from my brake light switch so I have a little bit more room to work with. So I got done testing my wires here and we're going to be using the green wire. Now I'm going to cut my green wire and I'm going to strip back both ends and I'm going to connect it to my red wire. So we're going to take one end of our green wire and our red wire, we're going to twist them together and we're going to put our heat shrink butt connector on the end of it. Now we're going to attach the other end of our wire to the other end of our butt connector. We can go ahead and plug our connector back into our brake switch, as well as the connector at the back of our brake controller. Now if we come back under the engine bay here, we're going to need to run a wire from each copper terminal on our breakers to the positive terminal of the battery. Now we're going to have plenty of extra wire from the black wire that we had left over, and that's what we're going to be using. Now everybody's going to route them a little bit differently, but if you give me a few minutes, I'll go ahead and show you how I routed mine. So I took both my wires off the bottom copper terminal on my breaker here, and I routed my wires right next to my air box, right in front of the battery. I went underneath the air dam here, came around, and came up to the positive side of the battery, and I cut a small notch in the cover so I could fit my wires in and I don't have to worry about it making any contact or interfering with the cover. All we have left now is to clean up all of our wires, tie them up under our dash, and make sure they're not going to interfere with our feet or our pedals while we're driving. With our brake controller all hooked up, we're going to go ahead and test it and make sure everything's working properly. So here we can see that our running lights are working, as well as our left turn signal and right turn signal. And when we apply our brake, we can see that our brake lights are working, along with our turn signals. And if I hit the manual function on my brake controller, I can sweep and you can watch the voltage rise and you can see that it is functioning properly. And that'll finish up the look at the Universal Installation Kit for Trailer Brake Controllers, part number ETB-C7 on our 2016 Kia Sorento. Click the link below to shop, learn more, or visit us at etrailer.com.